Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG Show for Friday, November the 27th, 2020. So I am going to start today with another report on Canada's most wanted criminal, Adam Skelly of Toronto. His crime? Cooking barbecue for people and serving it to them on picnic tables outside his restaurant. Yeah, I know, pretty shocking, but that is the state to which Toronto has descended. This is from Joe Warmington in the Toronto Sun. Adamson BBQ's owner, Adam Skelly, has been released on bail. It seems many supporters want to help him do that. A GoFundMe campaign online boasts at least 3,200, donating over 150,000 as of Friday afternoon for the 33-year-old owner of Adamson Barbecue, who was arrested Thursday after defying orders to vacate his Etobicoke restaurant. Thank you for all your support, wrote organizer Barry McNamara, who originally set the goal at 10,000. Adamson and his family will sleep better tonight because of your generosity, but they face a tough road ahead in battling government, so keep that support coming. This is going to be one hell of a fight, monumental, says Joe Warmington. From Premier Doug Ford to Mayor John Tory, Skelly is up against not just the system that has decided the best way to fight COVID-19 is to lock down Peel and Toronto, but the city and province's most powerful politicians. And this is a tweet from Warmington yesterday. Adam Skelly has said police told him if he messed with the door that's had its locks changed, he would be charged with obstruction of justice. He was taken away in handcuffs. Another tweet from Warmington. Not only will unprecedented situation be argued in court, but needs to be. Uncharted water stemming from COVID-19 pandemic. Hopefully city province hang on to all correspondence so Canadians can understand decision process and players before judges rule if this was constitutional. His barbecue revolt odyssey began when he offered in-restaurant dining in his Queen Elizabeth Boulevard restaurant Tuesday and reached maximum attention Thursday with dozen police. Well, actually, there were 97 police. 97 Toronto police showed up at Skelly's barbecue restaurant. Meanwhile, Skelly spent the night in a jail cell in Toronto Police's 11 Division after being charged with obstructing police, trespassing, and other counts related to his decision to enter his restaurant that had its locks changed by order of the city, citing health statutes. Skelly, who has two other locations in the Greater Toronto area, has been very public in his defiance of the latest 28-day provincial lockdown order to help curb the current spike of COVID-19. I didn't think if these lockdowns continued, my restaurant would survive the winter, and I'm hoping I can encourage other small businesses facing the same fate to stand up as well, he said. He has some legal battles on this front ahead, but first he has to get out of jail, and that effort is starting with securing a lawyer for his bail hearing, which is scheduled for 9 a.m. when it is believed he will make his first appearance over video. Skelly did have high-profile and highly skilled lawyers Sam Goldstein, Murray Klippenstein, and Alex Wilkes on site for 2 days, offering legal advice that he ultimately did not take. Neither lawyer has been retained and are not involved with the process going forward. Some sources say Skelly has consulted other counsel, and perhaps at his court appearance today, one will be presented as his actual lawyer. If he doesn't have time to pull together legal representation in time for a bail hearing Friday, in light of the fact so many others charged before the courts are released because of COVID-19 concerns, it would be appropriate practice for Skelly to be not held for the weekend and reunite him with his family, which includes a 3-year-old son named Riley. But the court will decide. Skelly is not charged with violence, and there will be legal arguments ahead over whether or not he had charter rights to enter his own property or the validity of the emergency order itself. So, Adam Skelly is a white man, and our elite in Canada has decided that's a very, very bad thing. Faith Goldie had tweeted, "Just when you think Toronto can't get any gayer, good things these Indians," and I'll get back to that in a minute, "weren't making barbecue. then the police would shut this show down, and millionaires like Jesse Brown would be talking about how what these people really want to do is kill Granny Clowntown. Jesse Brown, who runs a website called Canadaland, responded, "White guy trying very hard to get arrested, got arrested. Meanwhile, some non-white people are temporarily permitted to exercise their rights. An injustice this one," meaning Faith Goldy, "cannot abide. Wasn't she banned for just this kind of shit last year?" Yes, and it is the prime directive of people in the Canadian media, well, the established Canadian media, to get all unofficial, non-certified, those who do not receive money from the federal government, to get them banned, deplatformed, possibly arrested. Ooh, white guy trying very hard to get arrested. Ooh, white guys, don't you just hate them? So what else happened in Toronto yesterday? This is from the Post-Millennial. Indigenous rights protesters have taken over the busy intersection at Yonge and Dundas Streets in Toronto in solidarity with the Wet'suwet'en Nation. The Wet'suwet'en Nation is in British Columbia, and they are fighting a pipeline. I'm looking at this video here, and the police are just standing by and watching, observing, securing the perimeter, I guess. Spencer Fernando writes on his website, "Why were rail blockades allowed to go on for weeks while Adamson Barbecue gets such a massive show of government force? The politicization of law enforcement is very dangerous and will lead to a much more divided country. For weeks, Canada's economy was at risk of being held hostage by illegal blockades of railroads. Those blockades were in clear violation of court orders, and more important, they put a large portion of the country at risk. Yet the response was far weaker than many expected. The blockades were allowed to continue for weeks, with authorities often just standing around or even actively blocking people who tried taking down the blockades themselves. The politicians claimed they had no control over enforcement of the law, yet after weeks of inaction, they finally ended the blockades just days after Justin Trudeau said enough is enough. By now, we are watching as a massive amount of police resources, 97 cops, are devoted to shutting down our Adamson Barbecue. The police snuck in overnight, changed the lock, surrounded the building, and a huge show of force brought in police on horseback and arrested the owner. The question many have as we watch this is why such a disparity in response? Why was the response to illegal rail blockades so weak while the response to one guy trying to keep his small business open is so aggressive? What we are seeing is the politicization of law enforcement, with the rules only applied to those the politicians want to see punished. As you can imagine, this is very dangerous for Canada as it moves us further toward what we see in anti-democratic authoritarian states. If people continue losing confidence in how the law is enforced, we will see more division and destabilization in this country, and our rights will be eroded more and more until things aren't recognizable here anymore. Well, they're not recognizable now when one looks at these lockdowns. What Spencer Fernando is describing is what Tom Fleming described in Chronicles about 20 years ago as a return to the status justice of the Middle Ages, that one is not judged so much on what one has done, but on what class one belongs to. And right now, the Indians, Native Indians, First Nations, Indigenous people, whatever you want to call them, they are at the top of the status totem pole. So let's look at the lockdown guide for Toronto residents. This is from the official City of Toronto homepage and updated November 27th, 2020 at 3:20 p.m. This guide provides Ontario residents with information on what is required during the provincial gray lockdown period, which began in Toronto in November 23rd to help stop the spread of COVID-19. Yes, what they have their tiers in Britain, and here we have our colors. Do they really expect people to memorize all this? Anyway, back to the guide, which is organized by do's and don'ts. Yes, it actually says that. It is important to know that breaches of some of these directions will constitute offenses under the provincial regulations. Thank you for doing your part to help stop the spread of COVID-19 in Toronto. Don't travel outside of your community except for essential trips or emergencies. Don't forget to wear your mask, wash your hands, and keep your distance from coworkers when you are in the workplace. Are they going to start doing bacteria checks for people to make sure that they have washed their hands sufficiently? Don't go out if you are feeling unwell. Don't have get-togethers or play dates with school friends after school, either in your home or outside. Don't attend in-person tutoring or lessons. Don't have visitors inside your home that are not required. Essential support workers and emergency repair persons are permitted. Don't hold or attend indoor organized public events or social gatherings except with members of your own household. Don't hold or attend outdoor organized public events or social gatherings of more than 10 people. Don't have children visit your home unless you are operating child care services as defined by the Child Care and Early Years Act. Don't have anyone in your home other than those permitted under provincial regulations. Don't eat or drink inside or outside at a restaurant, bar, or any other establishment where food and drinks are sold. Don't go shopping more than necessary or with a group. Don't shop in person at non-essential retailers. Don't shop in person at non-attendant essential retailers. This is repeated twice for some reason. Don't shop in person in malls except for essential services like pharmacies, grocery stores, and supermarkets. All other retailers are closed. And there's a whole host of other don'ts. Don't use a community center. Don't visit Toronto Zoo, Hyde Park Zoo, or Riverdale Farm in person. Don't attend indoor cinemas or theaters. Don't go to museums, art exhibits, or other attractions in person. Don't browse library collections in person. Don't attend personal care services such as hair salons, barber shops, nail salons, or tanning studios and tattoo parlors. So let's scroll back up a little bit. And let's look at social gatherings. Again, of course, the churches are closed, But you are not allowed to, under provincial statute, to hold or attend outdoor organized public events or social gatherings of more than 10 people. Well, at this Indigenous protest in Toronto last night, there seemed to have been well over 100, perhaps a couple of hundred people. They were also blocking one of Toronto's main intersections. Was anyone arrested? No. Of course, anyone arrested. No one was arrested. And this is the white privilege Canada, of which people like Jesse Brown and many others speak. This is from Colin Perkle at the Toronto Star. An angry Premier Doug Ford lashed out on Friday at anti-lockdown protesters outside his home, accusing them of intimidating nearby residents and saying their actions wouldn't sway him. His neighbors, Ford said in offering them a sincere apology for getting caught up in the situation, made no government decisions and never signed up to be targets. Did the people of Ontario sign up to be targets? Stop acting like a bunch of buffoons out there and start respecting the people of Ontario, Ford said. This is totally unacceptable that my neighbors are being intimidated, being threatened, and these people, they need to stop. Protesters opposed to measures aimed at curbing the lethal spread of COVID-19 have gathered outside the Premier's West End Toronto home daily. Protesters opposed to measures aimed at curbing the lethal spread of COVID-19. How many lockdowns has Ontario had? Quite a few. Have they done anything to stop the spread of COVID-19? No, they have not. But try again. You want to protest me? Come down to Queen's Park, Ford said. You can do cartwheels. You can jump up and down. Ford took aim at independent legislator, a former Conservative MPP, Randy Hillier, who did lead an anti-mask and anti-lockdown rally at the legislature Thursday. Police ticketed Hillier, whom Ford called irresponsible for allegedly breaking health rules imposed to curb COVID. Hillier's supporters took to social media to denounce the citation and restrictions as unnecessary. Ford, however, said it's unfathomable that some people believe coronavirus disease to be a hoax, when in fact the virus is so serious. Look to the states to the south of us that want to ignore the regulations. They're blowing up. They have mobile morgues driving around in Texas collecting bodies. Sure they do. If that's not a wake-up call, I don't know what is. Why don't we look at, say, Florida versus New Jersey? Why are the deaths in New Jersey so much higher than in Florida? One could say the same of the state of New York as well. Ford defended the restrictions that have shut down many businesses and limited gatherings as public health authorities urge people to stay home except for essential reasons. Well, they've done more than urge people to stay home. They've made it a crime to do otherwise in many, many, many occasions, as I just delineated. Ford said the proof is in the pudding. When we did it last time, we were down to almost 100 cases, which is unheard of in a population of 14.77 million people. Yeah, lock people up, cases go down, or infections go down. Cases is a meaningless word in this context. Let them out again, which you have to do eventually, unless you want them to die locked down, then the number of infections is going to skyrocket. Once again, if you are under the age of 70, you have a 99.95% chance of surviving COVID, and almost all of the people who have died in COVID-19 suffer from 1, 2, 3, or more comorbidities. The protesters outside his house, Ford said, were special interest and political groups. Oh, unlike health bureaucrats who were in no way special interest and political groups. Small business owners on this street and elsewhere in the neighborhood were among those anti-lockdown protests end up hurting, he added. Oh, yes. Yes. The beatings will continue until morale improves. Ultimately, Ford said the protesters were violating the very tenets of political discourse. Ooh, pretty high-toned words there, tenets and discourse. I don't think that the Premier of Ontario, Doug Ford, would ever use such words, but never mind that. There's an unwritten rule here in Canada. You don't go after people's families and neighbors. He said, you want to come at me, and leave my family and my neighbors alone. Unwritten rule here in Canada. Well, there are written rules in Canada, and they're contained in our laughably titled Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And Canadians have learned this year that this document is null and void. But heaven forbid that the Premier of Ontario be inconvenienced. That would just be a terrible thing. He can wreck the lives of how many tens of thousands or more people in Ontario as he wishes. No, but no, don't protest at his house because that is going too far. Apparently the neighbors are upset. Let's see. It's back to Randy Hillier, who is a Kingston, Ontario MPP. He's been charged under the Reopening Ontario Act. Can one possibly think of a more Orwellian term for an act which essentially says we're closing down the economy and society? It's called the Reopening Ontario Act. Supporters banged pots and carried placards, this is from Global News, that read, "Stop fake pandemic and lockdowns make the rich richer," on the front lawn of the legislature. Well, lockdowns certainly do make the rich richer, as we have seen with Amazon, Facebook, and many other companies. This is the second rally organized by Hillier in as many months to claim that the pandemic restrictions and lockdowns are unlawful and are causing more harm than good. Video of Thursday's event showed almost no one in the large crowd wearing a mask. During Toronto's lockdown, only 10 people are allowed to gather outside. Hillier's gathering far exceeded that. Oh, by the way, I did a DuckDuckGo search and I did a Google search for stories in the mainstream media about the highly illegal protest in support of the Wet'suwet'en people in downtown Toronto last night. You know how many I found? That many. 0. I wonder why that might be. On Thursday afternoon, Global News learned that Toronto police issued a summons to Hillier, the organizer of the event, to appear in court January 7th, 2021. If found guilty, the penalty ranges from a minimum $10,000 fine up to a maximum of $100,000 and a year in jail. Hillier said in a phone interview Thursday that he's looking forward to his day in court so that he can challenge the constitutionality of Ontario's COVID-19 restrictions. Let's go to the chat. Hello to Walrus Libertarian, William Hicks. Walrus Libertarian says public opinion seems to be for the lockdown. People are hysterical. Well, again, polling on this sort of thing typically it's not meant to measure intensity. That is to say, the anti-lockdown people are far more passionate than the lockdown people. And as for how many people it takes to change something like this, again, the Pareto principle, 20% of 20%. And if my math is correct, that's 4% of people. Greetings from Canada, SSR, says Palcazo88. He adds something like 70% of Canadians support the lockdown. Disgusting. Head McNeck says, have you noticed the spate of leftists online recently repeating the phrase, they shouldn't have broken the law ad nauseum? That's a rather interesting shift for them. No. Well, there's two kinds of laws. There's the kind of laws that apply to them and the kind of laws that don't apply to them. What we learned from Toronto's response, the police, the premier, the mayor, and certainly the media, is that if people want to flagrantly break Ontario's COVID-19 laws by gathering in the streets, if they want to commit public order offenses, or even what could be called a common assault in blocking an intersection, they will not be touched. Chocokin666 says it's also evidently concocted. It's enraging thinking that there are people who believe all this. Hello, Professor Paul. Canada is a silly country, says Yo Mama. Well, Joe Biden and his crew are determined to make the United States resemble Canada in pretty much every respect as quickly as possible. Again from Chocokin666, isn't Ford the fat crackhead? No. That was his brother, his late brother, who had been mayor of Toronto. His brother was, despite being described as rabidly right-wing, he was very multicultural and down with the brothers. He used to smoke crack with Somali gang members. I am not making this up. He lives in a van down by the river. Van living is trendy now, says Walrus Libertarian. They don't call it van. They call it something else. I forget what that might be. Emmett Kelly Zer says the situation with Adamson Barbecue also reminds me of Chronicle writer Sam Francis' idea of anarcho-tyranny. Well, that's exactly what it is. That's exactly what it is. That the police just sat on their hands. Well, several American cities were torched and looted, and the police, I suppose they arrest people in Portland, but then they get released to offend again. Choking666, honest question, these municipal globalist agenda shills, true believers, blackmail, bribed, I don't know, suborned perhaps. There's a lot of true believers there. Okay, let's see. We are the 20%, says Octopus Knight. Don from Beyond says, what? Self, family, and pets threatened. Okay, so in vaccination news, I don't know. Does it look like this narrative is falling apart? In Canada, we don't have the means to produce vaccines because the evil government of Stephen Harper, I don't know, going back to Brian Mulroney or whatever, this was privatized and it all ended up in France for some reason. And our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, the trustafarian nitwit, is blaming Stephen Harper for this, notwithstanding the fact that Justin Trudeau has been Prime Minister for over 5 years now. If he felt that strongly about virus production in Canada, he could have got it going again. From Global News again, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says the majority of Canadians should be vaccinated against the coronavirus by next September. He cited Canada's top doctors as he detailed the news from outside his home on Friday. The fact that the doctors highlighted that if all goes to plan, we should have a majority of Canadians vaccinated by next September. Do you see where he's going with this? Which means the lockdowns are going to continue until then. This puts us in very good stead, Trudeau said. We are working extremely hard to deliver as quickly and as safely as possible. One of Canada's top doctors said shortly afterwards that a September timeline is optimistic, although he added that he shares that optimism with the Prime Minister. I'm always in agreement with our Prime Minister, Deputy Chief Latrine Walla, Dr. Howard Najou, said with a smile as he spoke in French to reporters on Friday. Another one of these latrine wallas, not a heritage Canadian. Once again, these people come from countries that have no understanding of liberty and freedom, only an understanding of raw power. Najou explained that as things stand now, there is no vaccine that has been approved for use in Canada. Even if the two most likely vaccine candidates receive regulatory approval in the coming weeks, there are still 5 other vaccine candidates that Canada has signed advance purchase agreements with, leaving a lot of balls still up in the air. Najou added that what Trudeau said in terms of a timeline Friday morning is good because it is a target. Okay. And, oh, yes. Actually, I want to talk about this briefly, if it's still up here. There's a woman in Canada named Julie Lalonde, who calls herself award-winning feminist buzzkill. This is her description, not mine. Franco-Ontarienne femme, that is F-E-M-M-E, which I gather is some sort of sexual reference. Love MMA and VWs. I believe in high heels and high standards. She claims to be a victim of domestic violence, and she has parlayed that violence, which happened, I don't know, when she was 20 or something, into a career. She is one of Canada's top feminist rent seekers now. She has a new book out called Resilience is Futile, The Life and Death of Julie S. Lalonde. And she is not, she's not very happy with the people in Toronto who are supporting Barbecue Atom. She writes today, I have many femme skills, one of which is my ability to successfully put on silk stockings with stiletto nails. Yes, this really impresses me with what a serious person she is. So imagine my disappointment as I splurge on SheerTex Labs and got a giant pull within hours of putting them on. What a bummer. And I'm going to scroll down here to things that she had to say about Barbecue Atom. Just hang on with me. I think, as you can probably guess, her main problem with Barbecue Atom is that he is a white man. Boo! Boo! So Sean Hawkins had tweeted, and let's not forget the employees who didn't want to risk their health to serve maskless QAnon neckbeards who sneeze into their hands, whom we made quit, meaning they couldn't apply for EI. Yeah. So Sean Hawkins has made it clear that his hatred of his own people is self-evident. Why he believes that he should be applauded for this is not self-evident. Julie Lalonde commented, I hadn't heard about the employees who quit. What an absolute douche canoe. My goodness. Is this the barbecue hill you people are willing to die on? She says further of Adam, don't think my heart doesn't break for small business, says the rent seeker. My friend had to close her longtime business. My other friend had to lay off staff. Hell, I'm a self-employed educator who has lost 90% of her work. Oh, well, swings and roundabouts. But this dude is not an activist. He only cares about himself. Someone named Zoe Crofts had tweeted, I don't know Adam personally, and I don't doubt the guy's a jerk sometime, but he's also a small business owner defying a horrid, unscientific lockdown order at a time when Ford is giving local businesses almost nothing to survive. Why not target Ford instead, Julie? This post hurt my heart. And she responds, and yet it hurts my heart to see a white man, boo, click his heels as he gives the finger to millions of Ontarians who have sacrificed so much for this pandemic. They have sacrificed so much for this pandemic. Is that how it works? Or are these offerings to the COVID god? Also, I yell at Ford Nation a lot too. It's okay for me to spread my rage around. I've got plenty to spare. What I found so amusing, the next time I'm going to do a presentation on white supremacist capitalist patriarchy, I will use this as my Exhibit A and a report from Camille Karamali. What is he from? Global News, yes. This is Adam Skelly walking away from us yesterday when he declined a request for an interview, clicking his heels, headbanging to rock, grinning when police first arrived, and smiling as he got arrested. He has been enjoying this. Now, the amusing thing about reading all of Julie Lalonde's strictures against white men, if you look this woman up, you do a Google search of her, you will find out that if Julie Lalonde were any more white, she'd be clear. But being a quisling pays. And we have a lot of people at it. So the people in our hospitals, in our old age care facilities, they were proved to be completely useless at protecting old people from COVID-19. And I learned from National Review from Wesley J. Smith, whose work I highly recommend. An elderly Canadian woman was killed by her doctor because she would rather be dead than go through another COVID lockdown. When it looked like she would have to be confined to a room for 2 weeks, she asked for and received the lethal jab due to declining mental health and vitality. From CTV, Russell, described by her family as exceptionally social and spry, was one such person. Her family says she chose a medically assisted death after she declined so sharply during lockdown that she didn't want to go through more isolation this winter. This time, doctors approved her. Russell would not have to go through another lockdown in her care home. She just truly did not believe that she wanted to try another one of those 2-week confinements in a room, her daughter said. But note, for her death, she could be surrounded by friends and family. When 90-year-old Nancy Russell died last month, she was surrounded by friends and family. They clustered around her bed, singing a song she had chosen to send her off as a doctor helped her through a medically assisted death. No, the doctor murdered her. It is against the law in my country for people to consent to torture, slavery, or murder, but doctors get a special exemption. Wesley Smith says, so companionship to be made dead, but not to remain alive. And her family thinks this was a fine option, demonstrating how the social mindset becomes twisted by euthanasia consciousness. But we are told killing to end suffering is oh so compassionate, and lockdowns are measures of good public health. Bah! Those with eyes to see, let them see. This isn't an accident that this is happening the same time as COVID-19. And it's all part of Canada's COVID-19 Great Reset. Ramped up physician-assisted murder, aka euthanasia, and our government's plying addicts with top-quality illegal drugs. What is it added to? Culling the weak. That was a big part of the Great Reset. I'm going to be talking at some length about the Great Reset next week. Schwab's book on this, COVID-19, the Great Reset, which I'm going to be reading from. But the word has gone out to Canada's journalists that the Great Reset is a horrible conspiracy theory, and anyone who talks about it is a nutter and quite possibly a Nazi. But there has been something of a shift in the last week, because the Great Reset is real. I was talking a few days ago about, we were told some years ago not to use the word neoconservative or neoconservatism because it was anti-Semitic, notwithstanding the fact that Irving Kristol, the founder of neoconservatism, wrote 2 books with neoconservatism in the title. But so the Great Reset is out there. The World Economic Forum is real. Schwab is a real person. They've been at this for quite a long time. Aaron Wary of the CBC, he had a piece on the CBC website. The Great Reset reads like a globalist plot with some plot holes. Trudeau wants to build back better. Aaron O'Toole, who's the opposition leader, wants to build back stronger. Pick your terms, Canada. And he's going on about Pierre Poilievre, who has a petition against the Great Reset. Now, Wary mentions in his story that Trudeau used the word reset, and people extrapolated from that the Great Reset. In doing so, Poilievre brushed up against conspiracy theorists to imagine that powerful, shadowy figures are plotting world domination and tyranny. No, powerful, shadowy figures have never done that in the past. But this is how I responded to him. Do you know how to use the internet? If so, you would have found this June 6, 2020 statement from the Prime Minister's office in support of the Great Reset. And it's stated in full with the capitalization in the original, or perhaps you're just lazy. It's a press release from Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada, on the website pm.gc.ca. Prime Minister Trudeau speaks with His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales and the Commonwealth Group of Permanent Representatives to the United Nations. Yes, so what did he have to say in this press release? Today, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau spoke with His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales and the Commonwealth Group of Permanent Representatives to the United Nations regarding financing for development and the Great Reset initiative, with Great and Reset capitalized. The Prime Minister thanked His Royal Highness for initiating the discussion at such a critical time and for championing, wait for it, the Great Reset initiative to build a better and more sustainable future for all. The Prime Minister, His Royal Highness, and the permanent representatives discussed economic recovery and sustainability initiatives that will support the objectives of the Great Reset. Yeah, okay. So is Aaron Wary too busy, too lazy, doesn't know how to use the internet? There's a lot of people writing about the Great Reset and a lot of deplorables, non-official journalists writing about it. It doesn't take all that long to find out about these things. But wait, there's more. I further responded to him. A little digging would have also given you this. An August 2020 Victoria Forum Bank of Canada presentation from Deputy Governor Paul Baudry, the Great Reset, supporting the transition to a greener, smarter economy. Yes, and it appears to be a PowerPoint presentation. Yes, scenario analysis describes plausible future pathways. Is that how these people speak? Delayed action leads to a disorderly adjustment. How to quantify macroeconomic and sectoral impacts? They have no bloody idea. Let's shift from fossil fuels to forms of energy that have not been proven at scale. We don't even know whether they could even work at scale. And what are the environmental costs of these alternative sources of energy? Do they ever talk about that? No, they do not. And my last missive to Aaron Wary was, and you could go to the World Economic Forum's website, where you would have found a Danish parliamentarian's paean to the glorious world of 2020. That was a mistake. I meant 2030. I corrected it. Wherein privacy and private property have disappeared. In conclusion, try to keep up, Mr. Wary. And again, I will refer to this article, which is 4 years old. It's called Here's How Life Could Change in My City by the Year 2030 by Ida Auken, Member of Parliament of Denmark. Welcome to the year 2030. Welcome to my city, or should I say our city. I don't own anything. I don't own a car. I don't own a house. I don't own any appliances or any clothes. To you, but it makes perfect sense for us in this city. Everything you considered a product has now become a service. We have access to transportation, accommodation, food, and all the things we need in our daily lives. One by one, all of these things became free. So it ended up not making sense for us to own much. Gee, it sounds an awful lot like communism, doesn't it? Once in a while, I will choose to cook for myself. Oh, so in the glorious world of 2030, will it all be takeout? It's easy. The necessary kitchen equipment is delivered at my door within minutes. And then it gets collected again after it's been cleaned, and then it gets delivered again. Since transport became free, we stopped having all those things stuffed into our home. Why keep a pasta maker and a crepe cooker crammed into our cupboards? Why indeed? We can just order them when we need them. Is this woman insane? Is she considered the logistics of this? And further, shopping? I can't really remember what that is. For most of us, it has been turned into choosing things to use. Sometimes I find this fun, and sometimes I just want the algorithm to do it for me. It knows my taste better than I do by now. When AI and robots took over so much of our work, we suddenly had time to eat well, sleep well, and spend time with other people. Spending time with other people, that spreads disease. You might want to work on that one. The concept of rush hour makes no sense anymore, since the work we do can be done at any time. Seriously? I don't really know if I would call it work anymore. It is more like thinking time, creation time, and development time. Does this woman have any idea what work entails for the vast majority of people? No, apparently not. Let's go back to the chat. Someone was talking about brainwashing. How brainwashed would you have to be to buy into the 2030 future presented by Ida Auken? Okay, let's see. I bought a leather jacket today, says Chogokin666. Well, I hope you enjoy it. Visionary Companion says, a white man barbecuing and man construing and douche canoeing like there is no tomorrow. It is the way of the warrior. What is KMG Show's official brand of tea? I buy the 100 bags in a plastic bag sort that is sold in pretty much every supermarket. It costs $2.99 or something like that. Years ago, I used to drink Twining tea. I used to actually drink the loose stuff. But then I decided, I guess I'm not really a tea snob. So the no-name brand is good enough for me. If you want to go green, go nuclear, says Palcazo88. Yeah, that would be logical, I suppose, but these people can't separate the difference between nuclear power and nuclear weapons. Walrus Lobitarian says, who collects the money for all these services? Emmett Kelly's Earth, will we be reusing food in 2030? Yes, they will make us eat garbage. Bugs. Steve says, companies are filled with people like this woman. Work to them is meetings, emails, and reports that ultimately add no value. Yes, you see that in the brochures, what the companies present, and it's always this very airy office with the sunlight flooding in, and it's sort of, bare and modern. And you have a lot of women, 50% or more, and they're really well dressed and they look really in command. I hate meetings myself. I mean, I really can't abide them because it's just circular. People saying the same things over and over again. I'm trying to remember his name now. He was the second in command at the Disney company. It wasn't Bob Iger. It wasn't, was it Jeffrey Katzenbach? But he had a very good idea that he had an hourglass or an alarm on his desk. And when it reached 20 minutes, the meeting was over. And I don't know. I think that's a very good idea. Yeah, it was Jeffrey Katzenbach. Okay. So, where are we now? Okay. I suppose I could have put this in a later topic, but I'm going to talk about it now. One would think that the news media, I'm not the first to make this observation, would be, cheering for Trump to get a second term. Because what are we going to talk about if Trump leaves office? Is this going to be all COVID all the time? Yeah. It's one of those subjects that are there people who have decided that they are not going to talk about it? Is it banned in any places? I wouldn't be surprised. Actually, I wouldn't be surprised at all. So, okay, Dr. Anthony Fauci warns of bleak winter. They're all saying this, bleak, tough. Again, a memo goes out and they memorize phrases. Looking forward to Christmas in 2021. This is from Hannah Blow at Breitbart. Again, what does this mean? It means there's not going to be Christmas this year. He's encouraging Americans to be careful as Christmas approaches. In an interview with USA Today, Fauci explained that he will more likely forego his traditional Christmas plans as he did for Thanksgiving. According to the outlet, he spoke to his 3 daughters virtually and enjoyed dinner with his wife. You've been able to speak to your daughters or to anyone else virtually for more than 100 years. And this is progress, is it? For my own family, I'm saying we had a really good Thanksgiving and Christmas last year. We're looking forward to a really great Thanksgiving and Christmas in 2021. Let's now make the best of the situation, show our love and affection for people by keeping them safe. Okay, and this is from, Columbia. This is from Alana Mastrangelo at Breitbart. A professor at Columbia University says that the iconic Rockefeller Center Christmas tree should be canceled because it represents a toxic relationship between nature and capitalism. Its appearance was a metaphor for this year of pandemic, a slapdash coup attempt, projection much, and a general drubbing of American exceptionalism, wrote Professor Brian Kahn of the unveiling of this year's Rockefeller Christmas tree in an op-ed published in Gizmodo. This year's tree is also perfectly poised to reflect something more than our national mood. It reflects the absolutely toxic relationship we have with the natural world and the need to rapidly reverse course. If this year's tree sees any justice, it's that it should be the last. I went to Professor Kahn's his Twitter feed, and he said there was some story about Santa Fest being canceled in New York City because of coronavirus, and he said, I love cancel culture. I think it would be in his interest and the interest of everyone if he kept his ethnic animus to himself. Yeah, we're going to be seeing a lot more of this. This is from medicalexpress.com. Take a vaccine, develop in haste? Never again, says Maissa Cheby, who, like hundreds of other young Swedes, suffered a debilitating narcolepsy after a mass vaccination campaign against the 2009-2010 swine flu pandemic. The experience has shaken Swedes' confidence in any future vaccine against the new coronavirus, compounding fears about unknown long-term side effects. I will never recommend that, the 21-year-old told Agence France-Presse when asked about taking a speedily developed vaccine, unless you really have to take it because of life-threatening circumstances. The Swedish case highlights the complex task governments face in rolling out vaccines against the coronavirus, especially at a time when rabid social media misinformation is feeding skepticism in state institutions and even about the disease itself. Rabid social media misinformation. This is a story about hundreds of people in Sweden who suffered debilitating narcolepsy after a mass vaccination campaign. Does this person, whoever wrote this, understand the story that is being written? The trauma over vaccines is particularly notable in Sweden, which normally boasts participation of more than 90% in its voluntary children's vaccination program. But in a recent survey conducted by the Novus Polling Institute, 26% of Swedes do not plan to take any of the COVID-19 vaccines being developed, and 28% are undecided. Health authorities in the Scandinavian country in 2009 urged the public to voluntarily take the Pandemrix vaccine against swine flu made by the British drug company GlaxoSmithKline. More than 60% heeded the call, the highest level in the world, but Cheby and hundreds of others, primarily children and young adults under 30, were later diagnosed with narcolepsy as a side effect of the vaccine. A link was eventually established to the adjuvant or booster in the Pandemrix vaccine, which was intended to strengthen the immune response. Narcolepsy is a chronic disorder of the nervous system that causes excessive and uncontrollable drowsiness. I have sleep attacks all the time in all kinds of situations and at inappropriate times. In my food, at job interviews, at lecture seminars, at university, I've fallen asleep at my workplace. I fall asleep on buses and everywhere. It has destroyed my life. The Swedish pharmaceutical insurance has so far approved 440 of 702 narcolepsy claims linked to Pandemrix, paying out a total of 100 million kroner, or $11.6 million in compensation. From Will Jones at Lockdown Skeptics. Apparently there are 100 conservative MPs who have joined the COVID rebels and are just absolutely fed up with Boris Johnson. Today, Lockdown Skeptics is publishing a brilliant new briefing document for MPs that explains very clearly, with oodles of illuminating graphs, how the fatally flawed PCR test, which was never designed to be used on an industrial scale, has given the false appearance of a deadly autumn epidemic when in fact the underlying signals, such as GP respiratory consultations, hospital admissions, and overall deaths, are normal. Yes. Are we overcounting excess deaths? How many more have died in England and Wales in 2020 than in a normal year? To calculate the number of excess deaths, most of us follow the ONS in comparing this year's figure with the average of the previous 5. But is this a fair representation of how many deaths are above what would be expected? Not when the population is aging, explains Ross Clark in The Spectator. Not only is the population of England and Wales growing, it is also aging. The population of over 70s, for example, has grown over the past decade by an average of 2% a year. Therefore, year on year, we should expect deaths to rise. Simply comparing this year's mortality rate with the 5-year average does not give us a like-for-like picture. By this way of counting, 2020 was only running at 6% above average mortality by mid-November. Many of these extra deaths are the result of lockdown, not the virus, of course. Stop press. I mentioned this yesterday, and I went to the study and found that it was unavailable, and I thought the site was overloaded. But An article in the Johns Hopkins newsletter published November 22nd summarized the findings of Genevieve Briand, assistant program director of the Applied Economics master's degree program at Hopkins. She analyzed all-cause mortality in the US in 2020, comparing the data to deaths in previous years, and found, to her surprise, that 2020 was less exceptional than it seemed at first blush. Quote, surprisingly, the deaths of older people stayed the same before and after COVID-19. Since COVID-19 mainly affects the elderly, experts expected an increase in the percentage of deaths in older age groups. However, this increase is not seen from the CDC data. In fact, the percentages of deaths among all age groups remain relatively the same. How about that? Needless to say, the article no longer appears on the website of the Johns Hopkins newsletter, far too heretical, but there are archived versions available, and you could go to lockdownskeptics.org to find an alternate version. A reader writes, tells us how this happened, COVID in hospitals, to people that he knew. Long story short, oh, yes. Okay, I'll give a couple of examples. 2 days ago, our neighbor died at home after coming out of hospital from 15 months unsuccessful treatment for leukemia. Half that time was spent recovering from the stroke caused by the first bout of chemo. The second bout of treatment ended recently when he gave up on it all and was discharged to come home to die. Guess what? He'd also just caught COVID in hospital, having spent months and months in virtual isolation to protect him after an infected person was brought into the ward, so naturally he'll go down as a COVID statistic. He was 60. Last week, a close friend's father-in-law died too. He was in his 90s and had acute renal failure. He was whipped into hospital where he tested negative for COVID twice. By the third test, he caught COVID too after another infected person was brought in and successfully infected everyone in the ward. Of course, he's gone down as a COVID statistic too. Now, both of these men had terminal conditions and would have died anyway, probably at the time they did. But nothing can alter the fact that we have been suffocated by precautions to protect people like them for COVID, only for the health service we are supposedly to be protecting actually to allow them and the people in adjacent beds to catch the wretched disease. In this incredible, bizarro world, we're being exhorted to save the National Health Service from being crushed by a disease it's actively spreading. And I found this quite amusing, which I'll read it in full. A reader has decided to write to Deirdre, the London Sun's agony aunt, about a relationship that's gone south. Dear Deirdre, I'm starting to suspect there might be a problem with my relationship. Please tell me I'm not going crazy. At the start of this year, I started going out with a new man, Boris. He was charming and seemed very clever. He'd been to Oxford and could read Latin. He'd been around the block a bit, if you know what I mean, and he was a bit overweight, but he was good fun and very decisive. He liked to get things done, which was a big appeal. Anyway, in March, he started to change. We went down to the pub one evening with his friend Neil, who was a bit of a weirdo, to be honest. And Neil told him all about this Chinese bat flu that was going to wipe out the human race. Neil showed him all the stuff on his phone that he'd got off Wikipedia, and he did some calculations on the back of a beer mat, showing that the population of the UK would be basically wiped out in 6 months' time unless we completely changed our way of life. When Boris told me about Neil's predictions, I thought he was having a laugh. Sadly not. The next morning, he went to the corner shop and bought all the loo roll and pot noodles. Then he insisted that we stay at home completely. No going to work or socializing, and only going out to buy absolute essentials. He's a clever guy, so although I had my doubts, I assumed he knew what he was talking about, and creepy Neil was good at maths and had once been on Countdown. Anyway, Boris said it only needed to be for 3 weeks to flatten the sombrero or something. Don't ask me. So I thought I'd play along. Maybe it was a midlife crisis or something. Anyway, 3 weeks came and went, and still Boris wouldn't let me go out and see anyone or go back to work. I didn't complain, though. It's hard to explain. He'd spooked me so much, I kind of stopped thinking critically about what he was saying, and it wasn't too bad at first. I was a bit worried about the financial impact of not working, but Boris said he had lots of money in the bank, and it was quite nice to have a bit of time off. We watched Tiger King on Netflix, and I bought a lot of stuff off Amazon to take my mind off things. After several months, things got ever so slightly more normal. Boris said that we could go out again and go to the shops and talk to people, but we still had to stay safe at all times and stay 2 meters away from other people. I could even go back to work for a bit. I kind of played along with it, thinking he was about to lose enthusiasm for the whole bat flu situation. Then, in the middle of summer, out of nowhere, he suddenly announced that we had to wear masks whenever we went to the shops. This was when things really started to get weird. He even wanted to wear a mask when we made love, but I drew the line there. Then he got angry with me one day and said I hadn't been taking the rules seriously enough. I should say at this point that Neil and these other creepy blokes from the quiz team down the pub, Chris and Pat, were obsessed with this thing called the R number. This had something to do with how much bat flu there was going around. Every day they would call Boris up and tell him that the R number wasn't coming down enough and there was too much bat flu, and Boris would go white and say how sorry he was. Then he would take it out on me and give me these long lectures. One day, Chris and Pat sent him this really scary chart asking how we were, showing how we were all going to die unless we acted straight away. I remember Boris asking if this was a prediction, and for some reason this made them furious. And they kept screaming over and over, "It's a projection," which really confused him. Boris sat me down and said the R number was still too high, and it was all my fault for not following the rules. I must have been forgetting about the 2 meters, or not wearing the mask, or not singing happy birthday while I washed my hands or something. He said he had no choice but to introduce a 3-tier system. Tier 1 meant things were bad. Tier 2 meant that they were very bad. And Tier 3 meant that they were catastrophic. We were only allowed to do certain things depending on what tier we were in. This was the only way we could save Christmas. I asked if there could ever be anything lower than Tier 1, and he just shook his head and said that was obviously impossible. He called up Chris and Pat, and they said that we could start off in Tier 2. This meant I had to wear a mask even when I was driving in my own car and no one else was around. We went on like this for a while until one day Chris and Pat called Boris and gave him a stern talking to. Another projection. The R number was going to get high again. Boris then started shouting at me and accusing me of taking my mask off. It was back to lockdown. This meant no meeting anyone at all, no going to work, nothing. This went on for a month. I started getting very anxious and worried about everything. Plus, I had a really nasty shock one day when I happened to see Boris's credit card statement. He was tens of thousands of pounds in debt. I started crying and shaking and having some very dark thoughts. I think Boris realized how upset I was, and he sat me down and he said that he knew it was tough, but it was all for my own good. He didn't like locking me up like this, but I had given him no choice. Then his tone changed, and he said that there was some good news. The lockdown would end in December. I was overjoyed until he revealed that the lockdown would be replaced by the return of the tiers. Only this time it was even more serious. I could forget about Tier 1. It was just Tier 2 or Tier 3 from now on. To be honest, I couldn't even understand what the difference between these tiers was. It was something to do with eating a substantial meal and the rule of 6. Total gibberish, really. Boris did say that we could have 5 days off the rules at Christmas so that I could see my mum. But we would have to sit 2 meters apart with the windows open and not use the same serving spoons. I asked him if the more serious tier system meant that the bat flu had got worse. And here's the weird thing. He said that there was actually less bat flu than before. This made no sense, and I tried to get him to explain, but he started muttering hands-free space over and over again and talking about the toot of the distant bugle. I used to find that stuff quite charming, but to be honest, it's got really annoying, and I'm not convinced that he's in his right mind. I just don't know when all of this is going to end. It's unbearable. The bizarre rules that change every second of the day, the uncertainty, the endless control over my every action, the lack of freedom, the fear and anxiety. I think the mask is starting to make me ill. I just can't see any hope for the future. And here's the thing. I've got a friend who works in a hospital. She says that the bat flu was actually real and it was quite nasty, but it wasn't anything particularly out of the ordinary. They've coped with that without much difficulty, and it seems to be going away now. They're having a pretty normal winter in a hospital, certainly no busier than usual. So why the tears and the mask and the 2 meters and the massive credit card bill? It doesn't make any sense to me anymore. I'm at the end of my tether. What should I do? Yours sincerely, Anonymous. Not received a reply yet, but it could go something like this. Dear Anonymous, You ask me what you should do, I'll tell you. Pack your bags and leave this man right now. This is not normal behavior. The constant control, the limiting of your freedoms, the psychological manipulation, the false hope, the small rewards for good behavior, the forced financial dependency, these are all the hallmarks of an abusive relationship. Perhaps he can't help himself. He seems to be a deeply deluded man. He probably wants this to end as much as you do. This is not your fault, but it needs to stop now. Let's go back to the chat. Chogakin666 says, KMG looks very sanguine today. Perhaps I'm just tired. There's a showing of this place at, 15 minutes after the show ends, and I spent, I don't know, about 3 hours cleaning, scrubbing sinks and washing floors and stuff like that. And I guess I just got ready in time, finished all that up in time to have a shower and a rush here. I guess I am feeling fairly sanguine. Jonathan Paul says, I gotta watch myself or I'm gonna start speaking in that middle-class English accent again. I have to be careful. What are these tiers? The tiers are they're like the color zones in New York City or the color zones in the province of Ontario. There's the worst tier where it's just assumed that unless everything is locked down completely, everyone's going to die. And then there's another tier where there's still restrictions, but not as restrictive. And then there's, tier 1. There don't seem to be tier 1 anymore. The chief health officer, Latrine Walla of Britain, was lecturing Boris Johnson on what was going to happen. And I thought, can't he have him arrested or something? No one elected this bureaucrat to be the dictator of Britain. Let's see, AlphaGo says London is tier 2, a lesser tier with more freedom, which is madness as London is a foreign hellhole these days. Walrus Libertarian says it's like fascism without the cool uniforms or trains running on time. Jonathan Pohl, so like some sort of internal colonialism. Steve, tears of a clown, more like communism, John. Well, as far as the Great Reset goes, I mean, 2020 has been outstanding experiment. You must do this. It is for your own good. I guess we must. Walrus Libertarian says, show our love by having them pleasantly euthanized to avoid sour feelings over the holidays. Okay. And let's get back to it here. In about a little over 20 minutes, I'm going to be talking about, in the book club, Claire Ellis's The Blackening of Europe, Part 1. And finally, from Alex Berenson, Rebecca Jones had tweeted, virtually all scientists and doctors agree we need an immediate lockdown to curb COVID-19 spread in the United States. Where do you stand? With science experts or against science experts? There were 39,390 votes. 25% stood with the science experts, 75% against the science experts. This is from the People's Daily China. All available evidence suggests that COVID-19 did not start in central China's Wuhan, but may have come into China through imported frozen food products and their packaging. Experts say this. Berenson says no better evidence SARS-CoV-2 leaked from a Chinese lab than this. Here's the CDC data. All-cause mortality in 2020 is 13% above expected. 12% doesn't account for the reporting lag. There will be 350,000 plus excess deaths this year. Many of those are lockdown deaths, including some fraction of those counted as COVID. But the majority are real COVID deaths, almost all sick or elderly or both, but pretending the deaths aren't happening isn't helpful. So, on to, Eric Clapton is in the news. This is from Uprocks. Van Morrison continues to rage against the lockdown, and this time Eric Clapton has joined him. As the winter months are upon us, the spread of COVID has led to many cities across the globe to move into a second lockdown. While the new rules are put in place to save lives, veteran musician Van Morrison has expressed his outrage over the safety measures, and now Eric Clapton is joining him. The pair announced the lockdown protest song Stand and Deliver, which is expected to be released in early December. The single marks Morrison's fourth anti-lockdown song following Born to Be Free, As I Walked Out, and No More Lockdown. On the bright side, the single seems to be at least for a good cause. Yes, people speaking out for liberty, freedom, that's on the bad side. Proceeds from Stand and Deliver will benefit Morris's Lockdown Financial Hardship Fund, which aims to provide funds for musicians who have lost work as a result of the pandemic and shutdown of the live music industry. Oh, yes. So what was the response on Twitter? You'll have to understand a lot of younger people don't like Eric Clapton because he's racist, but also because we had to sit through a lot of dinner parties soundtrack to his MTV Unplugged album. From Nuanced Opinion Guy. Yeah, okay. A lot of people out there who know what Eric Clapton said at a concert in the 1970s. Auntie Mia at Auntie Mia Official. I was today years old when I learned Eric Clapton is such a huge racist that in the 1970s, the movement Rock Against Racism was started after Clapton showed public support for a UK far-right party. And now he and Van Morrison have put out an anti-lockdown song. Makes sense. You see the same thing. You know, Trump was complaining about these fake trends on Twitter, and I saw one myself yesterday, which I mentioned. Hashtag BBQAnon. And I clicked on it. There was nothing there. There was literally no tweets with that hashtag. So they create the hashtag, they create the trend, and then they expect the tweets to follow. Shortly before yesterday's show, I clicked on it again. There were 2 tweets, and it was trending. Phoebe Bridges was ahead of the curve in canceling Eric Clapton. Oh, dear. Phoebe already told y'all Clapton was trash in Moon Song, says at Life is Terrible. I have more detail on this, actually. I've been listening to Eric Clapton's music for a long time. What? Going back to the Yardbirds, 35, 55 years, something like that. From Newsweek, Eric Clapton's past racist comments surface after announcement of his anti-lockdown single. Actually, Eric Clapton was not making racist comments. If you look at Eric Clapton's band, the bass player and the drummer are black, and the 2 backup singers are black. Eric Clapton has worked with black musicians, for 50 years? And his music, of course, comes out of the blues. He said, what would you think that I have any trouble with black people? He doesn't have any trouble with black people. He just doesn't think that Britain should become a black country. Yes, in a concert in Birmingham on August 5th, 1976, he launched into a diatribe. Do we have any foreigners in the audience tonight? If so, put up your hands. So where are you? Well, whatever you are, I think you should all just leave. Not just leave the hall, leave our country. I don't want you here in the room or in my country. Listen to me, man. I think we should send them all back. Stop Britain from being a black colony. Get the foreigners out. Get the wogs out. It's a word that begins with C and has 5 letters. I'm not going to repeat it. Keep Britain white. The black W's and C's and Arabs and effing Jamaicans don't belong here. We don't want them here. They have their countries. We have ours. That's the essence of his message. A piece at the Quietus, which is a publication for serious music lovers. I'm not being sarcastic. By David Stubbs 4 years ago. During August 1976 gig in Birmingham, Eric Clapton made racist comments and praised Enoch Powell, inadvertently inspiring the Rock Against Racism campaign. 4 decades later, with Morrissey making offensive comments about Sadiq Khan and Britain reeling from Brexit, David Stubbs asks if anything has changed. And there's a picture here of Nigel Farage holding up a copy of Morrissey's autobiography. Oh, and yes, Eric Clapton spoke out in favor of Enoch Powell, and he's been asked about this repeatedly since then, and he continues to repeat his support for Enoch Powell. Let's see. Rock Against Racism described Clapton as rock's biggest colonist. Oh, I see. Is the guitar an African instrument? No, it isn't. It's a Spanish instrument. Did we get electricity from the Africans? No, they got it from us. Amplifiers, synthesizers, samplers, etc. Did they come from Africa? No, they did not. So who is colonizing whom? White people have learned from black music just as black people have learned from white music. That's the way culture works. And do they drag David Bowie into this? Yes. Yes, he was waving at Victoria Station. And of course, if you wave and your arm is fully expected, it looks like a Roman salute. Let's see, a long time ago in The Guardian, Eric Clapton is not God. That was his original nickname when he was with the Yardbirds. He's always been questionable company. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. I mentioned the fact that Eric Clapton has worked with black musicians, and they play in his band. Willie Weeks, the great bass player, was in his band for what, 20, 25 years or something like that. Eric Clapton differs from, say, Jimmy Page in that, I was talking about this on Twitter today. Eric Clapton, from the time that he was in the Yardbirds and then Cream and then his solo career, the songs were not stolen from black blues musicians. They were credited to them. So what does that mean? Well, what that means is that Eric Clapton put a lot of money in old black songwriters' pockets, specifically Willie Dixon, Skip James, and the modern generation Bob Marley, and the estate of Robert Johnson. Someone was talking the plagiarism of Jimmy Page. Just look up Dazed and Confused if you want to find out just how outrageous plagiarism can be. Jimmy Page heard a singer-songwriter called Jake Holmes in 1967 sing his song Dazed and Confused, which was released on his album The Above Ground Sound that year. The Yardbirds with Page played a slightly altered version of it in 1967, and in 1969, Page claimed sole writing credit for it on Led Zeppelin 1. What's even more amusing about this is that Page heard the song because Jake Holmes was opening for the Yardbirds in New York City in 1967. There's no plausible deniability there. Of course, you could also ask the question of how that great Jeff Beck track, Beck's Bolero, has a sole writing credit by none other than Jimmy Page. People spoke up for Jimmy Page. And I responded, I'm not doubting Jimmy Page's great talents as a guitarist and producer, but the fact remains that the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, the Yardbirds, Cream, and Eric Clapton didn't rip off poor, mostly black songwriters, but Jimmy Page did repeatedly to the tune of millions of dollars. You know, talking about Eric Clapton as a colonist is preposterous, because if it hadn't been for the British bluesmen of the 1960s, such as Eric Clapton and Peter Green and many others, no one would have heard the blues in Britain. Very few would have heard the blues in America. and all of the bluesmen who were still alive would have died unknown and destitute. He did them a favor, and they did him a favor by introducing him to the blues. But as I say, cross-pollination is how culture works. So God bless Eric Clapton and Van Morrison. So who is Christine Sue? And who is she when she's at home? Why would anyone be interested? This is from Lucas Nolan at Breitbart. Tech news site Protocol published a profile recently of Christine Sue, the senior product manager for conversational safety at Twitter. Sue's approach to the platform's censorship will focus on transformative and procedural justice. Protocol's article was called How a Young, Queer, Asian American Businesswoman is Rethinking User Safety at Twitter, which profiles Christine Sue, Twitter's senior product manager for conversational safety. She describes herself as an activist entrepreneur who spent 6 years running a startup called Pasture Map that aimed to help ranchers plan climate-friendly grazing practices. Transformative and procedural justice are the foundation of Sue's vision for a safer Twitter. The once radical concepts challenge the notion that we should just punish people who cause harm, instead offering an alternative, a pathway to repair the harm that has been done and to prevent its recurrence. Transformative justice, in other words, forced public confessions, and a set of fair rules that make harm rarer in the first place, procedural justice. Transformative justice has recently gained attention for its roles in addressing sexual assault on college campuses, and a version of it has been adopted into the official legal system in New Zealand. Of course it has. Sue's goals sit at the heart of what could become a very different Twitter one day if, and it remains a very big conditional, the company is serious about the changes it's been signaling over the last year. Women and people from marginalized groups have documented disproportionate levels of abuse and harassment on the platform for years. That's because they're looking for it. And until recently, Twitter did little to change that. Its content rules stayed stagnant. And time and again, people reported incidences when abuse went ignored and harassment continued unabated. Well, if saying to some woman, "you're stupid," constitutes harassment or hate, I guess there's going to be a lot of it. When a woman says to a man, "you're stupid and I hate you," somehow that does not constitute hate speech. So I went to Christine Sue's Twitter page. She has pronouns, she and they. And her flags are of Taiwan. What's this one? I don't know what this one is. And the rainbow flag, of course. And yes, if current traditions don't sit well, we can make our own, of course. In our Jewish Asian household, a fave over dinner is to reflect on our origins and give gratitude for how we came to settle here. Also a great day to pay our Shumi land tax. And then my ancestry is part Hakka, called gypsies or guest people, unlike Han subgroups, not tied to a province or region. Hakka people have been migrants for 2,000 plus years, the most diasporic group in Chinese ethnicity, thankful to know and name these roots of being a guest in any land. This woman has literally defined herself as a rootless cosmopolite, and she is boasting of it. And this is the woman who's going to be in charge of what you can or can't say on Twitter. Are you looking forward to it? And let's have a round up of stories on social media creeps. Give me a second here. This is from the National File, Frank Salvato. Facebook, Twitter, and Google did a tremendous amount of damage to the nation in the run-up to the 2020 general election by censoring not only relevant information that voters needed to make informed decisions, but stifling the free exchange of political discourse by the electorate. Now comes word that Facebook's role in stealing the election isn't finished. In the days immediately following the November 3rd election, claims of widespread fraud, including video and documentary evidence, were burning up the social media platforms. This is when Facebook reportedly made an emergency change to its algorithm. Facebook's censorship team initiated the algorithm protocol they had been working on for months to suppress news sources, predominantly from the conservative right and those in support of fair and manipulation-free election process, that were spreading what Facebook deemed to be, quote, election misinformation, unquote. The change, according to the New York Times, involved weighting news and information sources using a secret internal ranking, which had been created by Facebook censors of publishers based on signals about the quality of their journalism. The result of the algorithm they created was biased to the left, featuring posts from progressive outlets such as CNN, the New York Times, and NPR. It also resulted in the down-throttling and suppression of posts from so-called right-wing publications and programs. Twitter, this is from Lucas Nolan at Breitbart. Twitter is blocking users from sharing links to lawyer Sidney Powell's lawsuit relating to widespread voter fraud in the 2020 presidential election. Potentially harmful, they are called. The platform describes the categories of links it will block: malicious links such as malware and phishing, spammy and misdirecting links, links that break Twitter rules on such topics as terrorism, child sex exploitation, illegal goods, hateful conduct, violence, etc., and hacked materials. Twitter also claims it will block links that include, quote, content that interferes with civic and election integrity. Oh, and this is from Steve Watson at Summit News. YouTube gets brutally ratioed after attempting woke takedown of Thanksgiving. For Indigenous Native Americans, the fourth Thursday of November is dedicated to Indigenous history, activism, and resistance. It's called Unthanksgiving. YouTube found that Americans are in no mood for yet another woke lecture about their holidays this week when it received overwhelming backlash for posts slating Thanksgiving. The Google-owned company took the opportunity to educate Americans on the history of Indigenous people, an alternative day of activism and resistance called On Thanksgiving. YouTube is heading up the resistance from its corporate headquarters in California. That wasn't enough, though. The activism continued. Generations before have lived on these lands. Days like On Thanksgiving are opportunities for learning and understanding whose land you live on. Find out here. I wonder about that. So if I have to go back to where my people come from, okay, that would be one thing. But these Silicon Valley creeps having to go back from wherever they come from, that would be delicious. I think it would be almost worth it, actually. In election fraud news from Joe Hoft at Gateway Pundit, we caught them. Lynn Wood outed mysterious Georgia operative Gabe Sterling. New video shows him admitting he helped set up drop boxes and promoted far-left activists as absentee ballot counters. Lynn Wood had tweeted, "Hey, Gabriel Sterling, you don't have State of Georgia email? How does your company, Sterling Innovative, make money? Did you or your company receive any of this $10 million plus grant, implementation manager? What do you do except to go on TV and deny the clear voting fraud in Georgia?" Just a reminder, of course, that the election has not been decided. Again, Joe Hoff from Gateway Pundit has a story. Current actual election result update. President Trump has 13 paths to win 2020 election. Biden has only 10 paths to win. Have you been following the reports of Biden's would-be cabinet and his top advisors? Invade the world, invite the world, immiserate America. They're going to be palmy days for Wall Street. It's with Janet Yellen as Secretary of the Treasury. You might think that, looking at the state of the stock market, these people wouldn't be greedy for even more, but no, that would be to underestimate them. J5 Killer, let's check in on him. He retweets Scott Fishman and Gore versus Bush. Every court, including the circuit courts, tossed out the cases until it advanced to the Supreme Court. The Bradford file tweeted Biden should confess now and beg Trump for a pardon. Kim Baeksu says, I used to enjoy perusing Michael Tracy's Twitter feed because he struck me as one of the few principled left liberal journalists. Not anymore. His refusal to recognize that the 2020 election was systematically rigged will be seen in the fullness of time as an embarrassment. Tragic. J5 Killer comments, Tracy knows the truth, but he's too afraid to say it. Let's see. Ray Sawhill tweeted, in my judgment, the evidence is widespread. I conclude the following. He's quoting. The vote distribution in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, Arizona, Nevada, and Georgia are not based on normal system operation. Instead, they are caused by fraudulent electronic manipulation of the voting machines. And before I moved on to the book club, I was quite taken by this article at the Federalist. Don't drink a Grey Goose unless you're a college drinker, by Inez Felcher Stepman. And I gather, Inez, that's a woman's name, isn't it? Grey Goose vodka on The Sopranos. This seemed it seemed out of place. So it's French, supposedly. And she writes, now I realize the French have made quite a reputation for themselves in matters of gastronomy and intoxication, their wine, their cheese, their duck confit. Far be it from me to push the people out of their well-deserved lane. To be honest, their accomplishments generally outshine my own hereditary Slavs in that department. But vodka we know. Contra your neighborhood hipster bar, there is no such thing as craft vodka. Vodka is vodka, and there are only two kinds of it at the end of the day. There's the good kind, which tastes like melted ice and allows you to conduct your business in the morning, and the bad kind, which comes in a plastic bottle and tastes like draining fluid hangover, but has the advantage of being a cheap buzz until you wake up with a spike through your temple. Grey Goose is the latter, priced like a fine bottle from Rems. Whoever decided that we should extend the gourmet trust the French have rightfully earned in other areas to vodka should be tried by a jury of his peers and executed in the street. Let's be honest, in terms of quality, you'd be better off purchasing a $25 fifth of Finlandia or Stoli from the local liquor store than spending the big bucks on a bottle of Grey Goose, which, if the company was more candid, would come in a plastic bottle like Popov. In a sense, the most offensive thing about Grey Goose is the transparent reliance on marketing to absolve all sins. Look, I know this is America, advertising capital of the world, but some things are sacred. In some tension with its French roots, Grey Goose is all marketing, no cattle. Apparently, the company managed to get itself declared the winning shot of the U.S. Open. To be fair, with the amount of melon involved in the Open signature cocktail, you can hardly taste how crappy the vodka is, but that's the sort of thing that ought to be confined to college parties and the lowest shelf at the store, and that's exactly what offends me about Grey Goose. Even the French origin of Grey Goose is more smoke than fire. Although it's produced in France, the brand was conceived by the same American who started importing Jägermeister, another alcohol disappointment. The label is now owned by Bacardi. I realize it's 2020. I understand that insipid influencers now rule popular taste and that they're probably no worse than the tastemakers who come before them. But please leave vodka out of this neoliberal branding nightmare. Save your money and order something else. Your wallet and your virtual presentation in the morning will thank you. But what I find most amusing of these people buying Grey Goose and other ridiculously expensive vodkas, I'm not really a vodka drinker, but I know people who are, is they will pay through the nose for an allegedly superior vodka, and what? Then they'll drink it with Diet Coke or something like this. If you're going to buy really expensive alcohol, there is only one way to drink it to justify the price, which is neat. Although, as Kingsley Amis pointed out with regard to Scotch, the same principle applies to vodka. If you are going to drink it neat, about half of the alcohol is just going to disappear. You're not going to get the effect. It should be adulterated 1-to-1 with water. So I am going to move on now to the book club, which is the Blackening of Europe, Volume 1, Ideologies and International Developments by Claire Ellis, and it was published by Arctos in London this year. Now, it transpires that Claire Ellis was not a person that I'd heard of until this book. She is a Canadian, or at least she was educated in Canada. There was a notorious, or so the media would have you believe, a professor at the University of New Brunswick, his name Ricardo Duchesne. And she was a PhD student of Duchesne. He was run out of UNB on a rail for comments about multiculturalism, immigration, and the like. This is a long book. It's a very, very long book. And there's 3 volumes in this series. I think in terms of, for a general audience, it might be useful when Claire Ellis has concluded her trilogy to bring out a 1-volume recension of the 3. And just as Solzhenitsyn did with the Gulag Archipelago. Actually, according to Amazon, it is only 292 pages, although for some reason, the way that it renders on my e-reader, the quoted selections are printed in a typeface that is so small, I had to boost the typeface for the book overall to a very high level, so that there are only, a handful of paragraphs on one page. So it's only 292 pages. But there's a lot in it, a lot in it. Actually, again, I've opened this up with Adobe Digital Editions, and it says that it's 941 pages long. So that there's a mystery. There is a mystery. What this book is about is she's giving us what the intellectual wellsprings of the multiculturalism and cosmopolitanism that led to, that justified, that demanded large-scale non-white immigration into Europe. And she talks about this strange person, Count Richard Nicholas Igiro von Coudenhove-Kalergi, described as 1894 to 1972, an Austro-Hungarian cosmopolitan, geopolitician, and philosopher. His mother, Mitsuko Aoyama, was a wealthy Japanese woman, and his father, Heinrich, was a Bohemian noble coming from a family of mixed European heritage, Flemish, Czech, Austrian, Hungarian, and Greek, and a long line of nobility, 800 years. Kalergi wrote numerous books and articles about European integration over his lifetime. He is often considered the founding father of the European Union. He was the recipient of the first Charlemagne Prize in 1950, and today the European Coudenhove-Kalergi Prize is awarded every 2 years to leading personalities for their extraordinary commitment in the European unification process. In addition to the Coudenhove-Kalergi Prize, the Europe Square in Germany, a gold euro coin, an Austrian peace monument and stamp, the European anthem, Beethoven's Ode to Joy, and a Viennese park honor and testify to Kalergi's legacy as a major figurehead in the integration process of Europe. The pan-European movement continues to influence European unity to this day. Kalergi, well, he believed in a united Europe. He wrote, "Europe as a political concept does not exist. The part of the world with that name covers peoples and states in chaos, a powder keg of international conflicts, the breeding ground of future conflicts. This is the European question. The mutual hatred of Europeans for each other poisons the international atmosphere and is a perpetual worry to even the most peace-loving countries of the world. The European question will be resolved only by the union of the peoples of Europe. This will come about either voluntarily by the construction of a pan-European federation or coercively by Russian conquest." Now, it's easy to see considering the devastation of World War I and World War II, why European unionism was so popular. And Kalergi's vision had the bonus of being very strongly anti-Bolshevist. But it's a reading about these cosmopolitans, one comes to the conclusion that they simply have no understanding of human nature at all. In order to realize a federated Europe and a world federation, yes, federated Europe leads to world government of some sort. This is always the goal, that either it is some sort of, it's world government, one rule, or it's some sort of federation in which all conflicts are solved by mediation. Kalergi suggested that the League of Nations be modeled as a federation of federations, and that the European Union be modeled after the original League of Nations, which of course famously failed. A federation of states, something that Aristide Briand, a leading statesman of France, had already been working on. Kalergi claimed that for the full materialization of a united and prosperous Europe, national colonialism needed to be replaced by the joint colonization and exploitation of the resources and land of the African colonies. This would lead to the creation of Eurafrica, a large geopolitical bloc that had the Mediterranean Sea as its central axis and would encompass and Europeanize nations in the African and Muslim world south of the Mediterranean. Africa was seen as part of the geopolitical sphere of Europe, a link that needed to be strengthened. Kalergi believed that European federation required the proper exploitation of common resources so that Europe could develop its great African territories, which in turn would enable Europe to become capable of living for itself. Now, one can see in retrospect how patronizing this would appear to Africans. It's straight up colonialism, a kind of super colonialism, whereby the Africa exists to make Europe wealthier. The African colonies would be Europeanized along with other regions should they enter the pan-European community like Turkey, Iran, and Afghanistan, as this would be necessary for the coherence of Europe as a geopolitical and cultural body. Well, obviously, any polity that includes Turkey, Iran, Afghanistan, and Africa isn't Europe anymore. We see with people like Kalergi, Jürgen Habermas, say, who is very prominent in this book. Europe is not a place to them. It is not a history. It is not a collection of communities. It is an idea. And Ellis talks about this replacement of patriotism, that is attachment to a place, with a new kind of constitutional patriotism, where everyone will get along because, we swear allegiance to the Constitution, and the Constitution has the answer to all of our problems because it guarantees a liberal democracy. Now, we're seeing in the United States now, I suppose, that the sad and I think final decline of the constitutional cultism, because it's really quite obvious that the Constitution is a dead letter in the United States. That, as I was talking about yesterday, apparently it is one vote that prevents the First Amendment to the Constitution from being entirely nugatory. And as far as federalism goes, it has been demonstrated around the world that federalism doesn't work. One can look at Canada. One can look at the United States. Those are two very good examples. These are supposedly federal systems. No. Ottawa runs the show in Canada, and Washington, D.C. runs the show in the United States, regardless of what the Constitution might say. And when it came to the test in the United States, Well, Abraham Lincoln decided that 1 million people would have to be killed in order for the Union to be held together, because apparently back in 1789, what the 13 colonies were agreeing to was once in, never out. That's not how they saw it, you understand. But it turns out that, constitutions are living documents. I was talking, oh, yes, before I get into that, the Fabian Society. Now, Fabian Society in England, it was a lot of rich men who were associated with the British East India Company. And this was a colonial exploitation which made a lot of rich men. And so the Fabian Society was named after Quintus Fabius Maximus, a Roman general nicknamed Cunctator, or the Delayer, for his slow but sure measures to achieve his goal of defeating the large Carthaginian army led by General Hannibal in the Second Punic War, 218 to 201 BC. Rather than dealing with head-on battles, Fabius used tactics of illusion, harassment, and attrition to allow the Roman army to regroup and defeat Hannibal's army. The strategy of the Fabians can be understood by their doctrine of inevitability of gradualism, which is clarified by George Bernard Shaw, one of the leading figures of the Fabian Society and one of the main promoters of cosmopolitanism in Britain. He wrote that the methods of the society were stealth, intrigue, subversion, and the deception of never calling socialism by its right name. This can be read from the first pamphlet. The Fabian idea was to be patient and stealthy, then strike at the right moment. For the right moment, you must wait, as Fabius did most patiently when warring against Hannibal, though many censured his delays. But when the time comes, you must strike hard, as Fabius did, or your waiting will be in vain and fruitless. We see a similar thing with globalism. Beginning in the 1980s, we were told that globalism was inevitable. We were not told what globalism was, actually, other than it involved the world and it was more efficient. We were not told, for instance, that it meant the elimination of careers in the workplace. We were not told that it meant the gig economy. We were not told that it meant the immiseration of the middle class and increasing peonage of the working class. We were just told that it was good for us and it was inevitable. Now, the globalists suffered an enormous setback in 2007, 2008. And then in 2016 with Brexit and the election of Trump. But now in 2020, they have decided, with the excuse of COVID-19, they've decided to strike, and to strike hard. That their plan is in 10 years' time, life as we know it will no longer exist. No more privacy, no more private property. The government will provide everything, which of course reminds me of the famous old Soviet joke, we pretend to work and they pretend to pay us. Everyone seemed to be on board the idea of European Union. Winston Churchill was a prominent supporter, but I suppose when one remembers that he had an American mother, that he was a cosmopolitan himself. So in this book, we learn of the different kinds of cosmopolitanism, and a fair amount of space is devoted to Martha Nussbaum, who I was talking about a couple of days ago. She's mad as a hatter. Similar to the cosmopolitanism of Jürgen Habermas is the universal cosmopolitanism of liberal theorist Martha Nussbaum, who has 51 honorary degrees from colleges and universities around the world, has been the recipient of several awards, medals, and prizes, as the author of several influential books. Like Habermas, she updates Kantian cosmopolitanism and advocates world citizenship and internationalism while rejecting a world state or government. She also thinks international intervention against autonomous nations is justified to prevent genocide, and when has that ever worked? According to Catherine Liu, Associate Professor of Political Science at McGill University, Nussbaum's notion of a common humanity is a cosmopolitan ethic based on a universal morality that eschews parochial, especially national, limitations or prejudices, and is ethical in that it is an idea of shared or common moral duties toward others. In the words of Professor Des Gasper from the International Institute for Social Studies in The Hague, the moral cosmopolitanism of Nussbaum means the principles of human justice and ethics apply with global reach. Liu concurs, saying that Nussbaum's cosmopolitan ethical orientation is rooted in a primary loyalty of human beings to what is morally good, a good that is applicable universally. Nussbaum writes that all human beings are created equal and endowed with certain inalienable rights, and that moral obligations to the rest of the world are real. As all human beings are related and equal, they have substantive ethical obligations that transcend national boundaries, i.e., they have universal solidarity and cosmopolitan concern. Some time ago on Look Forward's old live stream, I talked about, in this space, the book club, John Gray's book, 7 Types of Atheism, and this is another example. This is warmed over Christianity with the religious element removed. There is no agreement on what is good amongst people. It simply doesn't exist. Oh, yes, the 10 Commandments. Oh, well, everyone agrees with that. No, not everyone agrees with that. And when it comes to cases, people are quite willing to break any or all of the commandments, and they have, as they say, good reasons for it. This idea that there is also this historiography, that the world is advancing, always advancing towards a progress and higher ethics and morality. No. How could you look at the history of the world since 1900 and believe that to be true? That we're all related to one another. For myself, I don't give much thought to, say, Tanzania. I wish the people well, but I would not pretend that anything that happened in Tanzania would affect me much. And I think that most people, if they were honest, would agree with me. Am I going to fight for the people of Tanzania? I don't know, the Tanzania. Neville Chamberlain was ridiculed in 1938 when he said that Czechoslovakia was a faraway country of which we know little, but he was exactly right. He was modest. Let's see, in the early 90s, Nussbaum criticized patriotic pride and endorsed world citizenship in her essay titled Patriotism and Cosmopolitanism. She declared that the goal of national unity and devotion to worthy moral ideas of justice and equality would be better served by the ideal of the cosmopolitan, who is a person whose primary allegiance is to the community of human beings in the entire world. There is no such person. Doesn't exist. There is this new class of globalists that Claire Ellis writes about, who have established globalist bug hives. London would be one, New York City would be another, I suppose Toronto would be another. And these are all, a lot of these people are rent seekers. They work for NGOs, or they are associated with predatory capitalism. I want to, one of the most important points that Ellis makes in this book is that the cosmopolitanism, as expressed in multiculturalism, that has been imposed on the Western world, gives special rights to all people except the native people, that is to say, the indigenous people of Europe. They don't have any special rights with regard to their own particular culture, and expressions of that particular culture are strongly advised against, to put it mildly. Just to give one notorious example, that displaying or waving the English flag, the flag of St. George, is seen to be a provocative and racist act. The newcomers, they have all the rights. People who were here before, they don't. I quite like this passage. The new cosmopolitans also tend to have mental health issues. As cosmopolitans have a universalist framework and seek to transform the world, they obviously experience difficulty achieving these lofty aims, which leads to imposter syndrome, a sense that one's life is not significant and one is a fraud who has not accomplished the point of existence, challenging the world. Strenger explains that since many cosmopolitans are wealthy intellectuals with a transnational sense of identity, they may also suffer from deep isolation, which is further impacted by other sources of vulnerability. Examples include a lack of a general sense of belonging due to their demands for freedom, travel, relocation, global, rather than local competition in the marketplace, etc., and from their renouncement of a number of existential moorings of more traditional forms of life, relations that are stable and that provide long-standing support networks. Thus, they cannot rely on family, community, religions, and national identities as a matter of course. They also have a combined sense of intellectual superiority, moral arrogance, and existential insecurity, often involving fear of natural groups. Although on the one hand, cosmopolitanists reject a tribal group based on traditional or natural relations, such as territory, ethnicity, or simple local belonging, on the other hand, they seek to belong to a cosmopolitan tribe that has been artificially created and is necessarily exclusionist, meritocratic, and nepotistic financially and familially, and they want to impose this artificial tribal life on everybody by enforcing a top-down cosmopolitanism. British philosopher Roger Scruton explains that the postmodern anti-national Western elite cosmopolitans are oikophobes, or those who are averse to their home. The oikophobe repudiates national loyalties and defines goals and ideals against the nation, promoting transnational institutions over national governments, accepting and endorsing laws that are imposed from on high by the EU or the UN, and defining his political vision in terms of a cosmopolitan values that have been purified of all reference to the particular attachments of a real historical community. Oikophobes consider themselves as defenders of enlightened universalism against local chauvinism. To better explain this view, one only has to return to Professor Klimika's theory of rights. As mentioned above, Klimika grants privileges to minority ethnic immigrant groups in the form of polyethnic rights, and he affords national minority groups group-differentiated rights, which include self-government rights. Both of these groups have special privileges, such as the right to preserve their distinct cultures and ethnic identities, and they also have individual rights. Although pluralistic cosmopolitanism means that different ethnic groups are merely one cultural group among many, with no single one being official, and though it holds that all cultures and ethnicities should be preserved and celebrated, Europeans are not included within this enlightened cosmopolitan project. I could speak about this book for quite a long time, and I've just scratched the surface. But I highly recommend this book for people who want to understand, as I said, the well springs of the multicultural cosmopolitan movement, and to understand just how sinister these people's plans for us are. Again, the book is The Blackening of Europe, Part 1 by Claire Ellis. It's published by Arctos, and you can get it at Amazon. Quick look at the chat, and then I am off for the week. Oh, When the Levee Breaks is played by Jimmy Page. Someone was praising that. Chad Chadson says Russians get mad when you suggest mixing vodka with anything other than stomach acid. Yeah. Again, I'm not a vodka man myself. I stopped drinking spirits a long time ago because there's just a tendency to drink too much too fast, which leads to trouble. Yes, Chogakin666 points out that the Fabian coat of arms is a wolf in sheep's clothing. Not even kidding. Yes, and Claire Ellis points that out in the book. AlphaGo says Habermas developed the ideal speech situation theory. You can only have good speech in politics if there is complete equality. That's your leading German philosopher post-World War II. Well, what was he, 16 years old when World War II ended? And I understand that he and many other Germans were scarred by this. That does not give them an excuse to wreck the world, but to destroy everything that has ever existed. The Russians could say just as much about how they suffered or how wicked they were during World War II and before and afterwards, but you don't hear them carrying on like the Germans, do you? Yes, Adorno's the authoritarian personality, and the Frankfurt School occupies a great deal of space in Ellis's book, as it should. Peter Levy says, have you heard of Hillbilly Elegy? I have heard of it. I was reading the reviews, and Ron Howard, what he made, Apollo 13, which I think is a very good film. He's a journeyman director. It was clear the knives were out for this right from the very beginning, because these people, in the book, they probably voted for Trump. So this is the worst film ever made. That's it for the week. I'll be back Monday at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. What is coming up culture-wise next week? On Theater Thursday, I'm going to be discussing Terry Gilliam's Dystopian, a fantasy from 1985, Brazil. And on the book club, I am going to be discussing a work of philosophy, A Tragic Sense of Life by the Spanish philosopher Miguel de Unamuno. If you like the show or any part of it, I'd appreciate it if you click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not already done so. If you would like to support this live stream with a donation, very much appreciated at any time, but especially at this time of flux and mutability in my own personal life. My PayPal account is kevin_grace@hotmail.com. Once again, kevin_grace@hotmail.com. If you're Canadian, you can contribute a donation directly through Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And I shall leave you with this, my traditional benediction. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear listeners and viewers, manage to form a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.